Okay, if I may, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Rosales, Schwartz, Hartke, Kibler, Maxwell, Quisenberry, James.
Here. Okay. The minutes are in your packet. I'm sure everybody read them. So I need a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Second. Quisenberry. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Good. Okay, next is the approval of the agenda and any addenda. Do I have a motion?
Move the agenda. Second.
Got a motion and second. Any discussion? Quiz?
Mr. James, I'd like to propose that we move item 12 to be considered before item 8.
Do we need a motion on that? Well, any discussion on that change? The reason it's being changed is we have a guest that's going to be here and they have another commitment, so we're trying to move that up for them. If that's okay with everybody, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. We'll move number 12 up to number 8. Any other changes? Okay, so we'll need a motion to approve the.
We have one.
We'll need a vote to
Just call it
approve
on.
the agenda. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next, we have an acceptance of a bequest to Citizens Committee for Restoration of the Clock and Bell Tower at the Champaign County Courthouse from Miss Elva Greason. And I think Mr. Beckett is going to present that or tell us about it. You want to sit at the chair there, Mr. Beckett, and turn on your mic. You push the center button there, the one that looks like John Jay. There you go.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let me first of all say, historically, when the courthouse project was ongoing, and I was first on the county board, probably in about the spring of 2001, we asked the county board to create a citizens committee, and from time to time, to appoint members to this citizens committee. And the purpose of the citizens committee was to raise private funds for the restoration of the clock and bell tower. If you may recall that the bell tower at the Champaign County Courthouse was a squat, square, castle-like object, unlike the original bell tower when the courthouse was built in 1901. The clock, it had been struck by lightning 3 times and had suffered other deterioration. The clock itself was not functioning, had not functioned for many years. The clock had been restored in 1976 as part of the bicentennial movement within the community, but it had fallen into disrepair. There were no funds for either for the restoration of the tower or for the repair of the clock. The county board, I would say, did not see that as the proper expenditure of public funds for the courthouse. And so in the absence of the Citizens Committee, there would be no restoration of the clock tower. There would be no restoration of the clock. So the county board agreed to create this special committee, the Citizens Committee, to restore the clock and bell tower. Several county board members over the years were members of the committee. I think I was continuously. I think Barb Wysocki was continuously. I think Steve O'Connor was continuously. For example, those are the county board members that I recall specifically. But the rest were not affiliated with the county board. They were citizens from all walks of life. Retired Circuit Judge Harold Jensen and his wife Pat were members of the committee. Roger Marsh, Steve Wattenham, Bruce Hannon has always been the chair, etc. So the committee never ceased to exist. We just stopped having meetings after we raised the money, and of course, the work was done. So as you see in your agenda, what happened was earlier this year, I think in early April, Elva Hensley Greason passed away. And to our pleasant surprise, she had amended and restated the Elva Hensley Greason Trust. And this was done in, I guess I got to figure out a date. Of my document here. This was done March 25th, 2008, okay? A provision of that trust, which I will read to you, says, this is Article 2.4 of that trust. I give the balance of the trust estate as follows: 35% to Pravina Covenant Foundation to be used for cancer care, 25% to the American Lung Association of Illinois for its general charitable purposes, 15% to the Citizens Committee for Restoration of the Clock and Bell Tower at the Champaign County Courthouse for its general charitable purpose, subject to the following provision: $15,000 of the above gifts shall be allocated to a separate fund which shall be used for the sole purpose of providing for the ongoing maintenance of the courthouse clock. 25% to Parkin College Foundation for establishment of the Elva Hensley Greason Scholarship. So that's pretty much it. So the point is that the Citizens Committee has been bequeathed 15% of her net estate, as best as I can calculate from the rough figures that the lawyer for Chase Bank, which is the executor, has given. It appears to be a gift in the range of $75,000 to $100,000. To accept this gift, the Citizens Committee does not exist but for Champaign County. And so the Citizens Committee, to accept this gift, would have to have the authority of Champaign County. For it to be a charitable gift, it's only charitable if it's on behalf of Champaign County. The Citizens Committee is not a 501c3 organization. The gifts that people gave to us in the fundraising campaign were deductible because it was to a government entity under a special provision of the Internal Revenue Code. And so Champaign County is in essence the ultimate beneficiary of the gift, and the conduit is the Citizens Committee, as it were. So we need Champaign County Board, on behalf of the Citizens Committee, to accept this gift. We need the Champaign County Board to authorize its officials or members of the Citizens Committee. I don't know exactly how you want to do it. I suppose legal will have to figure this out. We have to execute a document that accepts the gift. And so that's what we're asking you to do first on behalf of the Facilities Committee, is to recommend to the County Board that they accept this gift. It's pretty obvious that this lady wanted the gift used for purposes of the clock and bell tower. It isn't as if Champaign County could get this $100,000 and say, we're having problems with the highway building. I'd like to use the money to, repair the bridge at the highway building. Can't do that. I mean, this is a gift, a restricted gift that obviously is to be used for the purposes mentioned by Ms. Greason in her trust. And so that's why I'm here, to ask you to recommend to the county board that we accept the gift, that we execute the proper documents to accept the gift. And then ultimately, we have to accept the gift in accordance with the provisions of the trust. I guess I could ask Deb, could you read, do you have your minutes to read the resolution that we adopted at the Citizens Committee meeting tonight?
Recommendation to accept the bequest from the Elva Greason Hensley Trust and notify the executor that the county would create a separate designation of these funds to be used for the clock and bell tower in accordance with the provisions of the trust.
So that's what I would ask that you approve and forward to the county board for general approval.
So do we have a motion on the floor per the statement read by Ms. Busey?
I move that motion be accepted by the
Second, Gary. Any discussion? Any questions of Mr. Beckett? Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, I'm not sure if Mr. Beckett or Ms. Busey, but other than restricted for the tower, is it specifically for maintenance? Could it be for the bonds to pay for it? What
It,
what
You
can
know,
it be used for?
it could be used, you're asking me my general
Or
opinion.
Deb, I'm not
Yeah,
sure who I'm
I don't know,
asking.
legal would have to come into this. My reaction is, it could be used to retire debt. There
Related
was
to
at the time this gift was made, there was an ongoing solicitation to the public to raise money. We raised over $1.15 million before this gift, so it could be used for that. 15,000 of the money has to be used for maintenance if we're going to accept the money. 15,000 has to be used. But I talked to the lawyers. I had a conversation with Mr. James and asked him what he thought. And then I talked to the lawyers last Friday and asked them what they thought. And they did think that it was consistent with her wish. She thought we would be successful raising the money. She was worried about maintenance because the county has, we'd had a history of not maintaining the tower. We'd had a history of not maintaining the clock. She thought, according to them, that it would fall into disrepair again and the county would have no funds, special funds to do. She wanted to address that.
Thank you.
If I may, when I talked with Mr. Beckett, I threw out that, based on the will that, and I'm hoping Ms. Busey can somehow put this in there, I was sort of hoping this money would all go into a fund to maintain the clock and its mechanisms, and if it ever got hit by lightning or there is going to be needed requirements on it as far as tuning it up and so forth. And even if that money laid there for 20 years and was drawn on every so often to do that, because we could have wind damage to one of the hands, I don't know, but I'm looking at long range, and that this would be this pot of funds here that would be specifically for that, so we wouldn't have to tap into any other funds to keep it going. So that's what I was sort of hoping, and if she could do that, is anybody on this committee objectionable to that?
Could I comment on that, Stan?
Sure.
I think it's an excellent point. First of all, you have to understand this is an 1877 clock. If a gear goes out, you can't go online to the gear store and get a new gear. You can't run down the block to the hardware store and get a new gear. The gears would have to be machined, right, Alan? You'd have to create it from scratch. It would be very expensive. I'm not sure how far $15,000 would go if something really bad happened to the clock. But I also want to emphasize, because we have clockies and toweries that came together for this committee, this isn't just about the clock, it's also about the tower. One of the conversations that we had with Mr. Reinhardt was, there are lights out in the tower. It's darn hard to get those lights changed. It may be necessary to have a crane to be able to get something done. Those cost money. And there's no line item, you know, I think in general facilities of the county to be able to do something like that. It would be nice to have a line item of funds like this to be able to address the needs like that if the physical plant director felt that was something that needed to be done.
So we got a motion and a second, and no objections to Ms. Busey redrafting that for the full board when it goes forward. Quisenberry.
Just one question, Steve. In your discussion in the committee, did Bruce Hannon give any idea of what he thought that 15,000, how that would last for maintaining the clock? I know he maintains a lot of old clocks, so.
Yeah, not long,
No,
not
okay.
long. That $15,000, I think our belief is that that's a minimum. That would be a minimum. And, you know, that could be used up like that.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? We've had a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beckett. You can mail that check to my house. Have we got it? No. Any public participation? Seeing none, we'll move on to communications. Quisenberry?
Yeah, I have one communication. You may all remember that Carol Timms came and spoke to us during our study session on energy, and I got a follow-up from Carol after that meeting. At least one board member, maybe a couple, I think Rachel may have been involved with this conversation about the energy service companies and their guarantees. Carol wanted to make sure that she clarified something that she didn't think she did a very good job of, and that is that the energy service companies guarantee the amount of energy that will be saved, but they do not make any guarantees about the utility rates the county will pay. So I think we had a question about, whether it was an amount that was guaranteed or not, but it's an amount of energy saved. So you are still subject to the whims of the commodity market. It's just mitigated by whatever savings you've achieved. So she just wanted that clarified because she didn't have that full answer when we spoke.
Thank you. Any other communications? Ms. Busey, anything? Hearing none, we're going to move on. And number 12, for Rosales and Kibler, who wasn't here, we're moving number 12 up to now, which is the energy efficient study session. And we're going to go with next steps. And first I'll let Alan address that, and then we'll have Josh.
I don't think you need me first on that. This is what you're going to?
Yes. Do you have anything on that?
I do not.
Okay. Josh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to have Ryan and Cassie please come up. They came from Illinois Green Business Association to give us a short presentation basically on where we can go next with them. They spoke at our study session about their efficiency programs and how they can come into the building and help us not only with specific things like lighting and such, but with policies and a lot of other things. They, of course, know their area better, so they can better speak to it. So I will just kind of let them take over and let us know what their program's about and how they can help us.
All right. Thank you very much for having us here today. Just to give you, I'll touch briefly more on the certification process and what we would go through for making the, our discussion was having the Brookins Center go through the IGBA Green certification process. So we would go through our checklist assessment and sit down and basically work through areas of energy conservation, water conservation, waste reduction, landscape design, a variety of other issues containing to purchasing and program awareness along with community development. We would touch on all those items and we would draft a game plan to work within the building, work with the employees to basically completely do an entire overhaul and for the green practices within Brookins Center. And that would include policy assistance, as Josh had mentioned. So the IGBA would work with Brookins team, Brookins management, county board to draft a sustainable green business policy packet for the entire Brookins Center. And that would cover issues of purchasing and local purchasing, community involvement, along with energy conservation practices. That's just on the policy aspect. Cassie will touch on the partnership side and how we can really bring other experts and act as a conduit for other experts in the field of energy efficiency, water conservation, and things of that nature.
So one of the things that we had discussed was working with the Brookins Center to have it become a leading model or a leading building for efficient practices, purchasing, and be a place where it could be demonstrated that green business practices work, are cost efficient, environmentally efficient, and effective. So that was kind of our vision to help the Brookins Center also incorporate sustainability, but on the bigger scale, some of the ESCO things that we were talking about in the energy efficiency meetings, so the big energy projects and reduction for the Brookins Center, as well as in connectivity to incentive programs through DCEO and other avenues like Illinois Energy Now, we have spoken about. As well as other initiatives such as integrating a prairie landscape or rain gardens. As part of the project, we would evaluate the applicability and feasibility of some of these projects in the Brookins Center and be able to bring a multitude of different partnerships to the table and collaborations throughout the community and help organize that for the Brookins Center. So really having a lot of different sports activities out here, a lot of meetings, it would be a place and a hub for sustainability on multiple different levels right here in our Champaign County. So we propose that we help on the actual operations and practices side, help Perkins Center integrate some of these practices, as well as look at some other feasibility studies for bigger projects that the county board might want to address.
Yeah, you guys are talking specifically about the Brookings Center, and that's kind of where we spoke when we were together. But it could be a sort of an example of what we can then go forward to other buildings within the county, sort of like a test spot here. And I think, this building is notorious for its lack of comfortable accommodations. And I think some of the things you guys are talking about can also help us with that issues, make it a slightly more pleasant place for our employees to work, and not just efficient and save us all money, but get better work out of our employees because they're not so worried about whether they're going to be freezing in the summer or hot in the winter.
If I may, do you have a cost with this study and policy that you put together?
Yes, we do. For certification of the Brookins Center, it would be $1,500. And that includes all of our services through going through the checklist, implementation, resource connectivity for the actual facility as well. And then the different feasibility work that we were talking about in terms of solar panels or rain gardens and that sort of thing, that would be an additional cost anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500. But really, to work on the facility to make it a leading model in the community and to have this trickle down to other businesses and other, or not other businesses, other buildings in the county, as well as in our Champaign and Urbana cities, it would be great to have the Brookins Center as a model in this role.
Well, while you're talking about, then you mentioned green products. Are you talking about maintenance-related products such as cleaning supplies and stuff like that?
Yes.
So
So low
basically,
toxic, low chemicals, low pollutants, so better air quality, non-exposure to harmful chemicals or pollutants, exactly.
but you pull that information together with
Yes.
the cost factor to it, is what you're telling us, okay?
Yes.
And then this study, and you mentioned sports and other avenues to be used around this building. Are you aware that this is shared with the Park District and a lot of that goes on now?
Definitely,
Okay.
and we would be happy to work with them to see what kinds of creative things that we could do for the areas around the Brookins Center.
So have you done another study for another building locally that we could look at and
Oh,
say
yeah.
how much maybe they've saved or brought
We've
it?
worked with businesses all throughout Champaign, Urbana, Bloomington Normal, and Oak Park River Forest. Probably one of our biggest buildings that would be an example would be Busey Bank in downtown Champaign and Urbana. So that's a building probably has a lot more floors, but maybe not as equal to floor space. And we can look and see what kinds of different things that they encountered as an entire system, as well as integrating the policies, the management, and the equipment side of things.
Is there any way that you could give Mr. Reinhardt a list of those names and contact people that he might, when he has time, deal with? Right now, our budget has been set, but as time goes on, if there's any extra funds, I'm sure he'll look at that and get back to this committee.
Sure.
Everybody's going green. I, for one, am very frugal for the company I work for, so I try to do as much things in-house as I can to save cost. But it doesn't hurt to look outside, and if someone's already got that wealth of knowledge and can pull it all together, much like our gel study that was just done, it's well worth the money.
Yeah, we do everything from actually sit down and go through all of our standards and our checklists, which is about 175, but the business has to choose about half of those to become accredited under our program. And we pulled together all the resources. We're a certification management agent, as well as a promotion agent afterwards. For about 2 to 3 years afterwards, you'll be certified and promoted by the IGBA. So it includes that entire suite of service for that initial price.
So does that help us as far as, once we're accredited, as far as cost or getting other grants?
Yes.
Is that what it does?
Definitely.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Quisenberry?
I know our budget is set, but I know that we adjust things for operational reasons here and there. I kind of find it hard to believe that we couldn't consider a $1,500 kind of expense sooner rather than later if we followed up with Busey Bank and, did some reference checking and heard that it was a good thing to do. I just don't see $1,500 as being a barrier if we wanted to do this now, as opposed to waiting for the budget cycle, which would take us into December to actually take any action. I'd be curious to hear if Alan or Deb would disagree with that.
we have to come up with multiple $1,500 items throughout the year. It would not kill us, but it would be an extra expense we did not anticipate on.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. You have something, Deb?
Just that you talk about engaging all of the people who reside in this building. If you could also provide to us some assessment of what your expectations are of the staff in this building. And just a reminder to the county board that at least 4 of the offices in this building are administered by elected officials who, you know, I'm sure are interested in these initiatives as well. But if there's an impact on staffing, it would be helpful for us to know what your expectation is before we would begin this.
One of the great things that we do as part of our services as well, just to let you know, we incorporate employee education, awareness, different sorts of educational campaigns. So one of our partners we work with formed the initial Green Office Challenge in Chicago and a strategy to engage offices in sustainability. So he's one of our partners that helps us on the employee engagement side and expectations.
To add to that, our program is very, very flexible. As Cassie mentioned, we have over 170 green practices. So for each business and enterprise, like a building such as this, we will craft the green certification to the needs of that building. So if the employees are really passionate about X factor or Y, we will address those issues. And if they aren't, you know, if they really are passionate about having the space heaters and things of that nature, we will work around those habits and we'll be very, very flexible with the employees and the personalities within that building.
And I'll also incorporate employee feedback as well as a potential forming of a green team within the office of those who are interested.
Thank you. Please help me with this. Did I hear 1,500 or did I hear 4,000?
1,500 for the certification of the Brookins Center. Other analyses in terms of additional projects. So if you wanted us to evaluate the feasibility of a solar panel to be put on the Brookins Center, that would be extra, or those sorts of things. But $1,500 flat for the operations, employee practices, equipment, that sort of stuff in the Brookins Center.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the way those kinds of numbers come out, they usually come from an estimation of number of hours and dollars per hour. Can you give us a little insight as to how you came to $1,500?
Sure. It also comes from the amount of energy that's usually saved per square foot, so we factor that into the price as well. So number of employees, number of square feet are the 2 major factors that we use on those projects, and that comes from previous businesses that we've worked with and the number of hours that we spend. We spend actually way more hours with a business than what's covered by the fee. So we actually subsidize our certification costs with grants, foundations, donations, and other program income to be able to offer it at that low of a cost.
Okay, so I wouldn't be able to figure out how much your time is worth by that $1,500 amount.
I mean, we could figure it out, but it would be a small percentage.
How many hours would you expect to spend working on a building like this?
Goodness.
Currently, I'm working with the Economic Development Council of Bloomington Normal, and I'm working on certifying just their office space alone. And kind of the businesses they do reach out as part of the process. And I would say I spend about 15 to 20 hours a week on 10 to 15 hours a week on that certification project alone.
And how many weeks have you been doing that?
Currently, since I've been on the project for about 2 months. The length of the project truly depends on the open lines of communication with that entity, how good that working relationship is. Some businesses may take a little longer if we have, for example, an accounting firm. It's going to take a lot longer during tax season. Those practices are going to take priority. So it really is flexible with the communication we have with that enterprise.
The consultation time itself takes about 10 to 15 hours to go through the checklist, talk about different things, and then the actual implementation side can take anywhere from 3 to 5 months, I would say, on average, and that's with weekly and biweekly check-ins on our end.
And that's all covered by the $1,500?
Yes.
Okay, I'm even more convinced. Thanks.
So you go room by room and you make a list of everything per room, and then you provide us with that list?
Well, so for example, if we were going to work in this room, we would actually talk to someone on the facilities staff to go through the checklist in certain areas. So if someone takes care of the maintenance side of things or the purchasing, so we would talk to a purchasing manager about the purchasing. We would talk to facilities about waste, energy, water use, those sorts of things, what types of equipment. We would talk to management about the practices, how are practices in the office. So we talked to multiple different people to find out various aspects. And yes, we would also do a walkthrough of the facilities.
Because to me, talking to people, anybody can tell you basically their view, whether it's right or wrong. But to physically go into a room and look and say, okay, how's the lights, how's the switches, how's the sensors, is it
Right.
carpeted, non-carpeted? I mean, when I hear of studies, I want to make sure we're getting to the nuts and bolts, not just, people talking for hours.
It's not remote, and we also require verification for everything that a business submits towards their certification. So we have to see that it's being done or see that a purchase order has been made.
And I like that you have a history. I mean, that's a good thing, because now we can look back, and like I said, Mr. Reinhardt will check all that out and call some of those folks and talk to them. I mean, that helps. That
Yeah.
helps to know how you all work and operate, but,
Definitely, we can also provide you with a hotel in Bloomington Normal, which I think would be a good match in a couple other buildings.
okay. Any other questions? Any comments? Josh?
And believe me, I understand that coming up with $1,500 in the middle of a budgetary season is not always the easiest thing to do, but we do find other monies, and in my mind, this is a way to save much, much more than $1,500 in the long run. And, I hope to be here with you paying these bills for many years to come, so I think it'd be a great investment.
Since every committee member has spoken, I'll let Mr. McGuire, you got a question?
Sure. I think in a few minutes, you're going to come up with $300,000 for a building you didn't expect to have to do maintenance on. So, yeah, it is difficult to come up with $1,500. And then we discussed $2,500 that, depending on if you want to do something, if there is a study, it does sound good to have this study done. And then the time it takes for the staff to do these studies, because it's your time, but then also time to discuss the issues with these people. That $2,500, does it include, like, if there's solar panels? I mean, the cost of solar panels is, you want to do something when you do have the study. And are those costs above that $2,500?
They would be, for the actual equipment itself, yes. But the actual pulling together the partners, the information, the contractors, the funding, and putting it into a package is really what we're more talking about.
Okay, so it's greater than the $1,500, and not,
And then, no, that's just the additional side of things.
right, okay, just so we understand.
Yeah,
We're not just starting with the $1,500. Thank you.
Quisenberry?
definitely.
Yeah, I think everybody should have it clear in their mind that we pay the $1,500. There might be a list of things that they recommend for us that are actions that we would have to figure out how to pay for. For example, how the toilets flush. If there's a recommendation for going to automatic flushing systems, that's not in the $1,500. That's something we would have to long-term figure out whether we want to do it, whether we want to pay for it, whether it's worth that cost. I mean, one of the things I've struggled with is automatic light control systems, which if you try to figure out how much you save and try to make the cost of the light control based on the energy you save, sometimes it's really hard to make that case unless you're doing new construction and can start from scratch, because it's expensive to go through and replace all those switches. But we would be buying advice for the most part, and practices perhaps as well, which
So-
have a human cost as opposed to a capital cost.
Well, it's the
Is
practices.
that fair? Is that a fair summary?
I would say so, but it's also the engagement of staff and employees and time spent on actually implementing the practices to help save the money on the human factor and the behavior side of things. So as we're looking at some of these things, we can look at a range. So for toilets, you were using that example. We can look at a range of different options for that, all the way from can you offset it with a water bottle in the tank, all the way to can you retrofit with a dual flush fixture, or do you want to go all the way and replace the toilet system itself. So we can look at a wide variety of different options and even stage that over time. So as we're looking at these things and really investigating and baselining what's going on in the building right now, we can help formulate and put advice into a plan of action to put these different phases in place.
Josh?
I'd also add that you guys will work with us to find extra funding sources should we need to invest in any of these projects.
Yes. And the Illinois Energy Now, as we heard in the energy efficiency study session, is a great place to look. And Carol is on our board. Don Fournier, who's the advisor, is also on our board as well. So we have very good connectivity with those incentive and funding packages as well.
Well, with that said, I just want to make a comment that I've seen plenty of studies done in the short 10 years I've been here. I think studies have some value if the money on the other side is there to implement things. We had a study I shared with some folks here earlier, and I think I gave it to Josh previously, some past minutes where an energy audit was done with a lot of recommendations, but the funds weren't there to implement a lot of that. So the study basically was done at a cost, which that cost could have probably paid for some of the utilities. I just want to get to a point that our budget is fine, and I hear the, 1,500 or 2,000 or 3,000, whatever it may be. But as Mr. McGuire said, we got to look at the big picture, because there's a lot of people that come in and they only need 1,500 or they only need this. I personally wouldn't want to see a study that just gathers dust and 5 years from now we have to upgrade it. And I'm sure it wouldn't, but that's why Mr. Reinhardt runs that department. He knows what's ticking, not ticking. And if he says that we're safe to do it and he has the funds to do it and the time to do it, I think he's the gentleman that's going to come to this committee and give us that recommendation. Josh?
I would only add that sometimes one of the problems is the will of this board to follow through on some of these studies, not just the lack of money. I mean, I realize that well, let's just leave it at that, and we'll address the courthouse separately. When we're talking about spending $300,000 to tuck point a courthouse tonight, I think the idea of spending $1,500 that might save us multiple five figures on energy, I don't think is something that we can point at and say is going to probably sit on a shelf. I think that, I understand your point, Mr. Chairman, but I don't think that this is one of those cases.
Ms. Petrie?
Indeed. Cassie, do you think the folks at Busey Bank would be willing to share with us the documents that you all prepared for them to get their 9 buildings certified and the savings that came about because of that? Because I do think sometimes we're very short-sighted in the fact that we say, oh, we could have these savings, but we don't have the money to do it. Yet if we looked ahead, we would actually see that taking money from some other place for a short period of time would emulate these savings, and it might be very helpful if we could see, and I picked Busey because they're here. Not that your project in Bloomington Normal isn't also probably significant, but they're here, and the chair is emphasizing Mr. Reinhardt being able to conveniently chat with people, so some of those facts and figures might work nicely.
Definitely. I will
Thanks.
ask our partner with BC for
Yeah,
that.
great, thanks.
And that was a good suggestion. So with that, I appreciate your time, folks.
Thank
And
you
we're
for
gonna
having
move
us.
on, and thank you for the information. Okay, next, we're going to have IGW, Courthouse Masonry Report.
I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Riley Glaring with IGW to the board members that haven't met him in the past. And from there, I'll just turn it over to Riley. If you'd like to give us your report and explain some highlights.
And I think I just turned the mic on. All right. So we were tasked with assessing 2 things. First, the cracking at the old portion or the old courthouse that has been recently observed. I think, Alan, this came to your attention a couple of years ago now, or a couple of seasons ago.
Actually, so everyone remembers, it was discovered this spring. The initial thought was to look and clean and caulk the addition, and then we seen this happen.
So we wanted to assess that, figure out what happened and why. And then we were also charged with identifying what maintenance procedures might be needed on the new addition portion of the courthouse, now that it's about 10 years old. So I'll talk, and by the way, I assume maybe you have my report in your packet. I'm going to sort of give you an overview of the findings there. I'm going to start with the historic west portion of the courthouse. And you will all, I think all of you know that the courthouse is actually comprised of 3 types of masonry. The vast majority of it is brick masonry. We also have a sandstone base on the building and some sandstone sill courses or water tables at various points across the elevation. And then up at the top, we have what's called terracotta masonry, which forms the top or the cornice of the building. And we looked at each one of those components of the masonry. With respect to the face brick masonry, we saw a localized cracking of the brick masonry, and I have a couple of attachments in my report, and it's attachment A that gives you a couple of illustrations of the sort of the step cracks that you can see in the face brick. There were also a few brick that were actually sheared. On a couple of the arches over the tops of the 3rd floor windows on the west facade, there were some open joints in between where the arches came together, and a number of minor other areas of cracking and open mortar joints. And predominantly, all of this damage that we observed was on the south and west facades. Moving on to the sandstone observations, again, the sandstone base and some sill courses at various elevations. Again, we saw some limited cracking of the sandstone and some open mortar joints. And then finally, the terracotta masonry, which forms the cornice, that's all existing terracotta. There was no new terracotta put in, and there is no damage to that terracotta. And we suspect the reason that there's no damage to the terracotta is during I think it was the 2008 restoration project, they cleaned out all of the head joints or mortar joints in between the terracotta and repointed them, but every 20 feet or so, they put a soft joint in, so that accommodated whatever movement they might have experienced. So there was no damage up there. So now, that's just a very quick overview of the damage. Why? We feel very strongly that all of this damage is due to thermal expansion and contraction of the masonry materials. And and again, the damage was, I said, primarily on the south and west sides in my report, but I would go a little further and I'd say it was confined to the south and west sides, south and west facades. And we think because of the wider temperature differentials and exposures of the south and west sides caused enough thermal expansion and contraction to break open these areas. What do you do about that? Number one, we think you have to repair any of the damage that has occurred to prevent water penetration into the wall, which obviously will cause additional damage over time. And then we also recommend that we install expansion joints, vertical expansion joints through the face brick masonry and the sandstone masonry, minimally on the south and west sides, to provide some movement space for the inevitable movement of the masonry in the future. And by doing this, we'd be able to mitigate further damage and not have to, at least to a great extent, do the kind of maintenance that we're currently facing for a longer term. So that's a real brief overview of the old courthouse portion in terms of its damage, the reason why, and what I think the recommended solution is. Want to talk about that one first, or should I go on to the new addition?
Well, if I may, I'm going to allow some discussion at this point if anybody has any questions.
Yep.
Mr. Rosales.
My concern was the mortar, the mortar being used to sort of remedy the tuck pointing in those specific area. Was it a mortar default, or was it a construction default, or is it sitting on a avenue where major trucks and transportations have caused that crack?
First, let me say, I don't think any of those cracks are due to building settlement or any problems with the masonry supporting elements of the building. You raise a good point about the truck traffic moving by, but I'm frankly not sure about that. I reviewed the 2008 masonry restoration drawings and found that that architect, I think, did everything within their pocket of tricks to allow for movement on the masonry. That is, they used a special restoration anchor that tied the face brick to its backup, which allows vertical and horizontal movement. They used what they call a soft restoration mortar so that it could accommodate a little movement. But in the end, I think these exposures on the south and west facades, the temperature fluctuations are such that it still suffered this cracking.
Is this going to be a, if I may, is this going to be a situation where this type of repair will be done every 2-3 years or every year?
Well, I'm hoping not, but I think particularly we have to seriously consider the installation of these expansion joints, vertical expansion joints periodically across these facades to provide some space for this brick to move a little bit, to prevent the cracking. Now, I should point out also, not in the report, the south and the west facades are the longest uninterrupted facades on the building, so there is the potential for more movement by the brick. So again, by breaking these facades up with expansion joints, we'll be able to mitigate that and I think not have the recurring maintenance.
And that's where the sun usually hits, the south
Yeah,
and the west.
and
right?
that's part of the problem. That south facade is obviously directly exposed to the sunlight, and it also, there's no trees there's no shading on the facade, so it really has the most extreme temperature fluctuations across the year.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, I think when we're looking at this, we got to keep in mind that this work that he's talking about, if nothing is done, and if we don't improve on it, moisture will get behind there. In the wintertime, it freezes. Then we'll have inside damage, and then it could cause more damage as far as the face and everything else. So that's why even small cracks like this start, we need to be mindful of it. Washington Square, I was involved with that. It's a high rise. They let it go, and it ended up, we had a lot of damage, and it almost had to redo the whole building and the cattle bank. I used to be involved with that, which is this historical building. And what you brought up about the traffic, I used to be down in that basement, and it used to scare me because I thought that whole building was coming in. So all those factors come in, but those are factors that they're unknown. How much effect does it have or doesn't have? And I think what we're looking at here, when we look at cost, as Josh pointed out earlier, you've got to look at, if you don't do this now or do the bulk of it, in the long run, you're going to be spending a lot more money trying to get it all repaired.
Yeah.
So we got to be mindful of that as we go through this. Thank you. Any other?
Well, I would just like to tag on to that, Stan. That 2008 restoration project was, I think, primarily done because of long-term water damage to the wall.
I think you do make a very good point on invest in maintenance now so we don't have to do crazy things later. I think the jail is an example of where we could have done maintenance over years and not be at this point. I do have a question as to why expansion joints weren't originally used in this construction. Does anybody have any lead as to why that wasn't done?
Well, they weren't put in there originally, back at the turn of the century.
Of course, understandable.
And I'm guessing that the previous architect on the 2008 restoration project felt maybe a couple of ways about that. One, he probably felt that the restoration anchors and the restoration mortar and the fact that it's a historic building and probably didn't want to disrupt the aesthetic of a historic building, and that may have played in the role, although I'm just speculating.
Okay, I wanted to see your opinion. Thank you.
I will tell you that the new clock tower has expansion joints on either side of it as it integrates into the north facade.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about Geraldo's comment, because in the last 5 to 7 years, there's been a major reorganization of how the MTD routes their buses in that particular area, with the creation of the green hopper and the gold hopper and these other more rapid routes between the population centers. And I think many of those buses end up circling around the south end of the building to come across that street to hit those bus stops. So
South and west.
there may have been a significant increase in vibration associated with that kind of traffic. Because if you've been in a building, older building next to a bus going by hitting a pothole, you know it. I mean, they do that. They do have that effect. So we may see the culmination of several impacts being recognized in this. But I don't, I'll have to defer to the expert in the room as to whether the expansion joints would handle that as well.
Well, my common sense would say that, yeah, the expansion joints would help with that too, but I think should this project move forward, we need to do a little more homework on the dynamic loading caused by the buses. Now, I think we've all been in the courthouse, in the old courthouse, when buses have gone by, and you can feel them. But it's a structural shake. I'm not sure it transfers to the face brick.
Two quick questions. I know we've not really discussed too much about money at this point. It's in the document. But are there any, let's say, more cost-effective temporary solutions that can be employed not with what's being recommended? I just want to make sure we understand the range of options that we have to address this issue.
Well, I don't know of any other options to address the thermal expansion and contraction of the masonry other than expansion joints. So I don't think there are other, I guess the most cost-effective approach would be to patch and repair repeatedly over time. And but I don't know, I don't know how much, I don't know how often we would experience that, how much money it would cost each time. So I'm sure there would be, by putting in the expansion joints, I'm sure there would be a payback on that remedial work as opposed to a continuing repair and maintenance expense.
Is there an efficient or easy way to estimate the cost if we just decided to patch for the next, say, 2, 4, 6 years, just to give us a little bit more time to come up with this money?
To come up with that number, we would actually have to try to get a price quote from a contractor to come in and use the appropriate materials to match what we have and see what that was.
Deb, did you have something?
If I may, I was going to say the funds are sitting in the courthouse construction fund. It isn't like we're going out to have to bond or raise. The money can only be used for this. When people talk about patching, that's what's been done for years. Strongly against that. I hope this committee's against that. That's not the way to look at an issue when you're looking at it. You need to go with the best device at hand and listen to Riley here. I would say that he's looked at all the industry standards that are being used today and probably some other ones. I'm no expert in it, but I know that I've dealt with a lot of this and heard the terminology about weep holes and the caulking and the flexibility. Anything man-made, we all got to understand in this committee, anything man-made is going to fail sooner or later. It's just when. And we would all like a 20-year guarantee, but we're not going to get it. And I'm in hopes that when they spec this out, that we do get a little better guarantee with some benefit to the county, more so than we've had in the past. Go ahead.
And I can add a little bit to that discussion, and that is, if you look under number 5, under the old courthouse report, I give the preliminary project budget, and I can tell you the raw construction costs are the 83,340. The majority of that money is the repair work. The expansion joints are the lesser amount. I can't give you exact dollars, but I can tell you that it's the repair work that's the most expensive.
That's a question to Ms. Busey, because you said that the money cannot be used for anything else. Is that true? I mean, I understand where the money is sitting.
The money's in the courthouse construction
Understand
fund.
that.
There's $827,000 a year ago. The board at that time determined to leave it there for the
Right.
ongoing maintenance of the courthouse. The county board could change that designation if it so chose at any time.
Okay.
And you do have discretion. You could move that money into the general corporate fund. You could move it into the public safety sales tax fund. But last year, the determination was made to leave it where it is so that it could be used for maintenance.
Now, is it true that the money comes from whatever bonds were issued for the courthouse construction? Is
Right,
that
that's
the
all the
source
mon-
of the funding, the
Correct.
funds? Okay, so these bonds are currently paid for by the safety sales tax, right?
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so I understand the previous board made a determination to keep it there, but these funds are from bonds that are paid by the overall public safety sales tax, not just court-specific. Is that correct?
The bond revenue in this fund is the bond debt service is paid out of the public safety sales tax fund.
Okay, so, I mean, I don't want to keep the discussion going now, but my view on that is even though it's sitting in the courthouse fund, this is coming from, overall, the payment is coming from the public safety sales tax. And so I'm not opposed to maintenance by any means, but I'm not sure that that's the only maintenance of the criminal justice facilities we have in this county that is the highest priority. And what I would be opposed to is taking the thing that's sitting right in front of us now and ignoring all the other ones, which may be much lower priority, but I don't know what they are, and putting the money there. We know the money is limited. I mean, there is $800-some thousand, but that's about it. It's not unlimited. And there might be other things. We know, for example, one of the things I didn't know, that the satellite jail has issues that are not a lot less severe than the downtown jail, and so there are some stalls that might be slippery that might create a lawsuit. So I don't want to delay this discussion. I'm just saying, before we approve this much money going into this fix, I would like to see a more complete list of what other delayed maintenance issues we have, and then prioritize by what's really most important to do when. And maybe the patch is not a great idea, but it may have to be what we go with now, just to delay the damage and go after what's really urgent.
Well, on that note, Rachel, I would just say that even if you just patch, you're going to spend some of the money. You got setup time, men on staff, and I'm not going to go with all the details, but then when you go to do the work, now you've added to that cost, and you've spent good money after bad. It's like putting a spare tire on your car and hoping it's going to last a long time. When you've got the money, go ahead and buy a new one. And as far as funds set aside, I somewhat concur, and that's what Alan is working on. He's putting together a list of priorities. But let's be mindful of the state. If we keep dipping into everybody's funds and using them here and there, we soon won't have no funds as a reserve, and everybody's got a wish list. And you're right, we'll prioritize them, but we can only do one thing at a time, and we're dealing with this issue right now, and we are looking at the jail issue as it comes before us. Deb has said that any board can switch that fund, but I'm in hopes that we just don't think we got to solve all the problems at once, and prioritizing them and doing what we need to do needs to be looked at. And I'm sorry for that speech, but I'm going to jump back to Riley because we need to move this. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, just to conclude on the old courthouse, preliminary project budget estimate, it looks like you're looking at and this is a conservative estimate, I think, you're looking at a total all-in project of about $120,000 and 15 to 17 weeks to prepare bid packages, bid, and construct. So moving on to the new addition.
Real quick, Riley, when you say a conservative estimate, you're looking at like a not-to-exceed kind of number, right?
I would,
So
you could characterize it
more
that
is
way.
planned than you expect, but erring on the side of having enough.
Well, at this stage of planning, you can see I have percentage allowance or I have a raw construction cost estimate. I have a percentage allowance for other owners' cost, fees, printing, other project expenses, and then a 10% project contingency. And so at this stage of planning, I would call that an appropriate way to budget.
Yeah, I just needed to clarify what you meant by conservative there.
And Patsy, is this related to what we're discussing? Go right ahead.
Okay, I have some clarification questions
Sure.
on this. I am not remembering right now, photo 1 is where this cracking is. Is that the area where the bricks were replaced?
There is evidence of cracking at both areas where brick was replaced in 2008.
Okay.
As well as other areas that were
Okay.
not replaced.
And those bricks were replaced because it was water damage. Am I understanding correctly?
Well, I would say that's probably true.
Okay. So my next question is, our weather really hasn't changed here. So why all of a sudden do we think the issue is thermal?
That's the only way the cracking can have happened, will have happened, is thermal. I mean, it's a known fact that masonry will expand due to thermal changes. And the wall has been repaired, there's no water penetration, or there hasn't been any water penetration in this wall, so that's the conclusion. And I actually, as part of this little effort, I got a second opinion from a restoration structural engineer and an architect, and they confirmed my assessment that this was.
Okay, but I'm still not getting the logic behind this, that why, this is the old section of the building, why now is it being demonstrated that there's thermal shifting going on?
Well, that is to presume that there wasn't that going on prior, and I don't, that's probably not the case. I'm sure it has happened in the past.
So
In
then-
addition to the water damage.
Okay,
The
so-
water damage on this building actually occurred, if I recall, because we had problems at the cornice and at the built-in gutters of the building. So we actually had water sort of draining down inside of our wall, and then when it goes through the freeze-thaw cycle, that's what caused a lot of the damage. But I would suspect that it has always suffered from thermal expansion and contraction as well.
Then I wonder why the previous, whoever, I wasn't on the board then, the previous company or firm that worked on this did not identify that as an issue, if it probably was there. And I'm still not understanding the logic why expansion joints weren't put in back then, but I guess you can't quite answer that question. But this is a historic building, so how are these expansion joints going to be put in so they do not contaminate the integrity of the historic facade?
That's a good question, and that's
Thank you.
that's going to be part of the design process. And there are some early ideas about how to semi-conceal some of these joints so that they wouldn't be so apparent. I would tell you again that we saw no damage on the east or the north facades, which are, I mean, the most significant facades in terms of people coming past the building, along with the west facade. And I would tell you, I'm thinking that the expansion joints that are somehow integrated into the west facade need to be more sensitive to the historic appearance of the building than, say, for example, the ones that we have to put on the south facade. The south facade is, I would say, less historically significant than maybe some of the other facades. And frankly, the south facade has the most amount of damage. So I don't have an answer to your question yet. I think it's subject to design, but we certainly recognize the fact that we need to do a good job in and placing these expansion joints so that they both do the job that they're charged with, and that is provide movement space for the masonry to come and go, as well as be sensitive to the design of the historic building.
Well, I purposely asked these questions so they're on the public record because I certainly don't want a board in 10 years to be facing similar issues. Okay.
Quick comment, Patsy. I would just say that a lot of those same questions came up when White Burgorny was doing the study, and they were well recommended and well versed in their field. At that time, the knowledge they gave to all of us as we sat there was great. They explained it all. A lot of things happened. No one probably really has an answer, but hopefully we'll get a better job this time in other aspects. And with that, I'm going to move to Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under the allowance for other owners' costs, does that include engineering design and also construction engineering? Are you figuring that, or will those costs be separate?
That's a lump sum percentage allowance for architectural and engineering design. It would allow for bid document printing and any other miscellaneous expenses outside of construction to make the project whole. Is that?
So when the construction was done on the courthouse, 2000 through 2003, I recall that there was a significant amount of work done on stabilizing the brick in the old courthouse as a part of that process. Is that potentially a source of whatever was done in that stabilization step created the situation such that it would be different from what happened in the first 100 years of this building?
Oh, you're challenging my memory here a little bit. I believe we tried to solve some of the cornice stabilization problems as part of that first project, but it wasn't a masonry stabilization effort because I don't believe we could fund that work at that point in time.
I'm just trying to ask a question that would illustrate what Patsy doesn't understand here, which is why this wasn't happening every 10 years through the life of the building. Is that where you were going, Patsy? Yeah. Okay.
It was the extreme heat we had. You want to move on to the new building?
Sure. Okay, so with respect to the new addition, which is now approaching 10 years old, there are certain maintenance aspects to a masonry building, even though a lot of people think that there is no maintenance required on masonry. There is. Probably the most critical maintenance need on the new addition is the replacement of joint sealants. As you know, a building is comprised of not only masonry, but windows and doors and expansion joints, vertical expansion joints and horizontal expansion joints, and we are totally dependent upon joint sealant to close those joints off from water penetration to the building. So observations led us to find a number of issues with the sealants already. Sealants have a serviceable life, as a rule of thumb, call it 10 years. And we see evidence of sealant failure already at the new addition, which is not unusual, it just is. And so keeping water out of the building is the most critical aspect. Keeping water out of the building, keeping water out of the masonry wall to prevent masonry damage and repair and maintenance requirements. So that becomes the most focused need. And that project is, that's about all in a $75,000 total project to replace all the joint sealant on the new addition.
Any discussion on that? Is it pertaining to the project? No. Well, then you'll have to hold the question. On to option C.
The second maintenance recommendation for the new addition has to do with cleaning and sealing the masonry. Obviously, the masonry can it can suffer from the need for minor repair work, which would have to be accomplished before any cleaning and sealing, but with various elements staining the masonry, the appearance can be diminished over time. We're starting to see some of that on the new addition. And so we would recommend a low-pressure spray wash after any minor repair work, which there was a little but not much. A low-pressure spray wash of the north, south, east, and west elevations, in other words, the whole facility. And then the application of a vapor-permeable masonry sealer to prevent, retard the pace at which it stains, and also to guard against water penetration into the wall and, again, causing minor repair work over time. So that project.
That water sealer that's normally used, I know there's a shelf life on it. Do you know what that is offhand?
I think we were told recently by a masonry restoration contractor that the shelf life of masonry sealer is about 5 years, so I'd probably add a few years to that, but so 5 to 10 years. A reapplication is probably recommended.
Are you ready to take some questions?
Sure.
Thank you. In terms of that cost, that $109,000 for that last option, how much of that was actually cleaning versus doing the minor repair? Was most of that for the minor repair, for the cleaning aspect?
I think the minor repair was on the order of about $10,000 maybe, or less, $5,000 to $10,000.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions concerning this?
Just kind of a general question. I mean, when we look at what's going on with Champaign Public Library and with our courthouse, I think looking forward, it'd be interesting for this committee to always remember that building a Taj Mahal, even if we have the money at the time, costs a lot of money to maintain down the road. That's just the thought for the future. I also share Rachel's concern about spending a whole lot of money on obviously justifiable maintenance, but when we have a lot of other things to spend money on that may result in potential liability costs, public safety issues, things like that. I mean, to me, that's slightly more important than this, without diminishing the importance of maintaining this building. And also another question, just since I wasn't the one who brought it up, are you saying that planting shade trees on the south side might potentially reduce some of this thermal cracking down the future?
I don't think it would hurt.
Thank you.
Follow up on that, because I know Josh loves all this green stuff, and I am interested in it, but I see liabilities there, because I know the Village of Rantoul planted a lot of trees downtown, and then we had roots that were popping up sidewalks, and we had limbs that were falling in people's heads. So when we talk about liability, let's remember that end of it.
There's always pros and cons.
There you go.
Shade trees on the south will shade the windows, maybe reduce energy costs on the building, and maybe shade the masonry and prevent a little bit of the expansion or contraction.
Yes. I have several questions. Back to the part where I didn't get to ask about the sealants.
Okay.
I'm assuming these are architectural sealants, not something I go to Sears and buy, right?
Well, they're caulk
Okay.
sealant. I mean,
Okay.
you can buy them at Home Depot, but probably the ones we would use here are slightly higher quality and.
Okay. That leads me to my question of life of 10 years. I have stuff on my house that has been there 20 years and is doing just fine. So why is this problematic that it only has a life of 10
Well,
years? So if we do it this time, then a board in 10 years is going to be doing this again.
That's correct. If you're going to have responsible maintenance of your facility, you will do it repeatedly over time. 50% of sealants fail within 10 years. 95% of sealants fail within 20 years is the research out there currently.
Okay, so then the constant is the labor cost. So are there improved range of sealants 10 years later that if we up the ante on what we pay for the sealant, we extend our time of protection?
I think there might be a relationship between the quality of the sealant and its longevity, but there are huge variables in the service life of the sealant that have really nothing to do with the sealant. It has more to do with the temperature, humidity, UV exposure, and external factors that can shorten the life of a sealant.
Okay. And now to the new part of the building. You are recommending repairs and then power wash and then a coating on it. Was there a coating originally put?
Yes, there was.
And so it's had its 5 years of life, and then we're 5 years beyond that?
Correct.
And does this coating make the building such that it is no longer a breathable building?
No, it is, the type of coating that you would use wants to be breathable.
Breathable.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And Patsy, if I may, on sealants, I know in my work, we've got 50-year sealants, 25-year sealants, and 10-year sealants, and we've tried them all. And as Riley was telling you, we have tenants that may use harsh chemicals, and we're talking about buildings, when we talk about our homes, because I do the same thing, that are used 24/7 and see all types of things we never thought we'd see in and out of our house, coming through doors and using the building, leaning against the building, what have you. And then on the sealant that you were asking about, I know a lot of us have wood decks, or some of us, and I treat mine every 2 to 3 years. Basically, it helps repel the water that tries to permeate it, but it's a breathable type of liquid, and I'm sure what they would spec would be along the same lines, because if you put a lacquer or clear coat over that brick, you've got a bigger mess, because now you're sealing in all type of bacteria in that.
Right.
Well,
Thank you.
Sorry, Riley.
And you're trapping the moisture within the wall.
Right.
That's right.
If there's
It's the
some in
trapping
there.
the
And you gotta have it going.
Yeah.
Anything else, Riley?
No,
that you wanna add?
that's it.
Jim
for me.
McGuire has a
Well,
question.
I was,
Sorry, I'm going to kind of agree. There's been some discussion about maintenance, repairs, and I guess I would add catastrophic damage. You know, the difference to me is that we're trying to perform maintenance to keep the buildings from becoming what we have is, you know, actual damage, or like with the failure of the brick. You know, we don't want more leakage into the building, so we have a catastrophic failure of the brick. So there's a difference. We're paying to maintain the building, so those seals don't completely break, and then we have more leakage in the building, so we have to have greater repairs. We have a problem where we need to repair the building, and that's why there's a difference, and we can't put off those repairs, so we have greater catastrophic damage to the buildings. And that's, you know, so waiting on those repairs would be more of a problem and cost more for us, for the county. Thank you.
and Jim, just follow up on that, like I said earlier, if you piecemeal a job and you have your bids going out, your quotes going out, then you have your staff setting up to do the work, and then you want to come back a year later and do more work, you've got all those extra costs to start all over where you've already all got it on site doing the job. And that's where I always look at cost. I don't like spending money any more than anybody else in this room, other than somebody I know. But I try to keep my costs down and be reasonable. Any questions? Any concerns? Then we're going to hear a recommendation either from Alan or Ms. Busey, one of the two.
Thank you, Riley.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's see, what page is that on? Page 16 to 17, your agenda has a recommendation. But basically, I tried to explain to you that this happened this spring. This item was just found this spring, and I reported to the committee 2 months ago and showed you the pictures. So with the recommendations from IGW and their proposal, the preliminary project budgets, I believe it's necessary to complete as much work as we can, as soon as we can. If we allow the water to enter the building for another winter, there will be definitely more damage because there is already more damage noticed from when the first time I found it this spring to what we're seeing when I brought IGW down to take a look at it. IGW Architecture has an excellent knowledge of the courthouse. They designed the courthouse addition and the interior renovation of the original old building. And they have a proven and successful track record working with the county on smaller projects. So in order to complete this unanticipated work during this summer's construction season is necessary to move as quickly as possible. So there's currently the $827,000 in the court's construction fund, and of which $125,000 has been allocated for fiscal year 13 courthouse exterior maintenance. So at this point, I recommend options A, B, and C as outlined in IGW's analysis for the estimated total of $303,976. I guess so.
Do we have a motion on the floor to move with Alan's recommendation? I will make that motion that we do all this work as stipulated. Hopefully, it'll come within budget, not to exceed budget. So do I have a second? Mr. Rosales, any discussion? Gary?
I think this project points up the fact that, and we've talked about it before, we do need to have some sort of ongoing means to accumulate money on an annual basis into the maintenance of the entire county building system. When you look at this, it's roughly $30,000 a year. It's 10 years, $30,000 a year. And probably that's not unreasonable. Again, we need a better means to take care of the entire system, but I intend to support this motion.
Rachel?
I support maintenance. I don't think I can support the motion for the reasons I stated. I think if we indeed, and I don't know that we do, but if we indeed have more severe issues with other buildings in the justice system, like the jail, that could expose us to much bigger litigation issues, then I don't think it's responsible of us to spend the money here before we absolutely know that this is the highest priority. And so I certainly want to spend the money on maintenance. I think it should be going to the highest priority maintenance, and I don't think we established it at this point.
Mr. Kibler?
I would like to see us potentially consider just option A and option B with potentially the $10,000 from option C to do minor repair, just at least for the near term. To aesthetics from cleaning and sealing may or may not give us much, especially with the price tag. So I would like to potentially consider, I'm not putting it out as a motion yet, but just get other people's thoughts on maybe just going with A and B as opposed to all three.
If I may first. If we do that work, Jeff, and we don't put a sealant on there to shed the water, all that new caulking, expansion joints and everything are going to be exposed to the weather extremes. And based on what little knowledge I have of sealants and that, if you don't do the waterproofing and you have to clean it all before you can do it because you got to make sure everything else is gone, then you're wasting money. You really are. But with that said, Quisenberry?
Yeah, I was going to say that Jeff pretty much read my mind. I am fairly comfortable with A, and I'm comfortable with B. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with C because I feel like there's an aesthetic component to C, and not that I don't want our buildings to look good. I would suggest that if we have a project that may involve liability, we should be focusing on that rather than aesthetics at the moment. I'm pretty comfortable supporting A and B. I suspect that joint sealants are of themselves resistant to moisture, just by the nature of what they are. So I'm not too concerned about letting C go. I'm a little. The other thing that gives me pause about C is I see a big charge there, but I'm only hearing about $10,000 worth of repair, and I don't know what's the cleaning and what's the sealing, I agree we should probably seal this brick, but I don't know that we need to seal it this summer. We can't let this go. We can't ignore this advice. But from a priority standpoint, A and B is there. C, I'm not completely convinced on.
If I may, Riley, could you address, if the brick isn't sealed, what some of the outcomes might be? Could you use the microphone, please?
Microphone.
I think the sealer actually is for the purpose of retarding any moisture penetration into the wall over time so that we don't face any masonry deterioration. That's the primary purpose. Repairing the masonry and not sealing it doesn't seem logical to me. I think I suggested as part of the report, just on my own, that if there were funding limitations to the masonry cleaning and sealing, it could be done in a phased manner over time. Obviously, you lose some of the economy of scale of a larger job, but I would think that you might want to consider repair, clean, and seal as a complete process, and maybe not do as much as you had hoped to do, as opposed to just repairing and leaving it.
Riley, on a job we did, based on the sealant deteriorating over time and we hadn't kept up with it, my memory serves me that water collected on the face of the brick and we had chipping and cracking and some staining going on due to no sealant being there, and then it made the brick more permeable. Am I correct? To water?
If there's no sealer?
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, water, without sealing the brick, you run the risk of any slight imperfections in the wall, allowing moisture in, or allowing, if the mortar joints aren't struck just perfectly, allows water to sit on an edge or something, and the freeze-thaw cycle then begins the deterioration process, whereas the sealer will retard that for some amount of time.
Quisenberry?
Well, then I would suggest that we're not really being presented options then, because options imply you can do one or more of these things. And what I'm hearing is we can't, if we do one of them, we have to do all of them. I think, so it's not really options. I'm gonna struggle with that a little bit.
Any other discussion? Patsy?
I have a question for Ms. Busey. As I understand our rules in relationship to work being done on anything in the county, especially in these figures, don't we need to get more than just one bid on the work?
What you're being asked to do is, the recommendation is to approve a contract for IGW to prepare the bid documents based on this work. And the bids would then go out. Yes, all of this work will be done by bid.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification.
And I guess I would just add to Rachel's comments that based on this 300 and some thousand, there would still be roughly 500,000 sitting in that fund that could be allocated in case of emergencies. And we have done work at the jail as was needed and prioritized. We all sit here, and I've been hearing a lot of good questions about why wasn't this done before, and we can go back and beat that up till we're blue in the face, but here we go again. We're the same board 10 years later, looking back at history, and then we're going to make what I believe to be mistakes like the previous boards did because we want to cut the cost and come up with all these arguments about, well, we need a master plan, we need this, and we need that. And I'm not one that I like to get on the internet or go back and look at minutes, but a lot of these same issues, which I've shared papers with some in this room, have been discussed before, and we are moving forward on them. And I just think that we're sitting here, and I can't stress this enough, if you have a crew of people go out there, and yes, we may save 100,000 now, but when we go back to rebid this 2 years later and we have more damage, we're gonna end up paying what we're paying now at 300 and some, and getting it all done now, if we cut 100 now, we may end up spending $500,000 more later just to fix what we didn't do. And that's the problem I have when we talk about preventive maintenance and doing a job right and the money is there. We can come up with all the what-ifs in the world, and if the what-ifs happen, we will address those what-ifs. We always do. But we don't need to cut something because we're projecting that something's going to come up out of the dark. Mr. Kibler.
I would like from you, Mr. James, because you're the one that made the motion. I assume that this motion is just to have IGW solicit bids
Based on these amounts.
based upon these amounts, and then those bids will come back and have to be approved by us again.
That is correct, and I did say in my motion not to exceed.
Not to exceed. So in other words, we're going to be revisiting this again when probably the bids come through and we have to approve something.
But the main focus is this, is to allow IGW to move forward with getting the bid documents out and receiving them back. If it comes in at $500,000 or more, the money isn't there right now.
So if IGW comes back and says, the smallest one's $500,000, what's the cost to the county just to do this? Just curious.
I'm not going to answer that because I'll get in trouble. Deb?
What the actual action is for the county administrator and the facilities director to bring back to the county board a contract with IGW to do all this work. So that will provide you with that answer at the county board meeting this month if you proceed with this. And then from that contract, IGW will develop all of the bid documents, send out the bids, and you're absolutely right. It all comes back to you and then to the county board for final approval of moving forward based on what the bids are. And if I could just add one point about the facilities fund, I understand, I just want to remind you of what the board's intent was when they decided not to move this money last year, and some of you may already know this. We do have a lot of deferred maintenance. It is a big issue in the county. We all know that. With this money in the courthouse construction fund and facing maintenance on this facility that is basically just 10 years old now and has been recently dealt with, the position of the board is we have an opportunity at least to make sure that with one of our facilities, we do the maintenance in a timely fashion. We don't have to try and find the money for it. It's already there. It's funded and budgeted. We've included, you recall you did the roof replacement overview earlier this year. This fund has been identified as how we'll do appropriate roof replacement for this facility. So it's you have one facility and one fund where you actually have a plan in place. I would just throw that out as a reminder that that was the reason that the board stuck with this concept, because we knew we had this project, scheduled maintenance for the courthouse this year, and with the money in this fund, you're able to do it without trying to scramble and find the money in some other place or not doing it and facing bigger problems and issues later on because there was deferred maintenance that wasn't dealt with.
And if I may, Deb, and John Jay will remember this because him and I had a lot of meetings over this and discussions with Mr. Beckett. When we started the clock bell tower, that project was supposed to be in between the $2 to $3 million range, and it ended up near $7 million because when we started into it, we found out that tower was in a lot worse shape due to lack of maintenance on it, and we had to go all the way down to the ground and rebuild it. There was no saving it. And here we have an opportunity to maintain this building. It's a lot of money, but we've got a grand building that we've sunk a lot of money into, and we need to keep it up. Mr. Josh.
I do want to say that I really agree with you on the point that if we're going to do this, and almost certainly we will end up doing it over the next year or two, all the A, B, and C, just as well do it all at one swoop when, once they set up the scaffold, don't make them come in and set up the dang scaffold again next year, get the guys on the ground and do the work. We will save money in the long run. So while I am torn and I believe that the liability, and there probably are other things we can spend this money on that would be more important to me and my constituency, I do see the point, and since we're probably going to do it, it's probably best to do it all at once.
Thank you. Patsy?
A question for Ms. Busey. The amount estimated is 304,000, basically. And then what do you guesstimate will be the additional amount of money that the board will need to consider for this firm to do all of the setting up specs and the bidding
That's included. It's included in the estimates.
in this 304? Thank you.
Quisenberry?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to call the question. Second.
Question's been called. So the motion, you're called, do you need a motion on that, or?
You made the motion from the chair.
I've got lost in all my discussion here.
I would request a roll call vote, please.
That's fine by me. We'll have a second on that? Second. We're going to have a roll call vote on the motion on the floor to have all the option A, B, and C done as per the motion made by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Rosales.
Rosales?
Yes.
Schwartz? Hartke?
Yes.
Kibler?
Yes.
Maxwell?
Yes.
Quisenberry?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, Riley. Okay, moving on to the next one. The DCEO grant, Public Sector Energy Efficient Program update.
Certainly. All work has been completed. The application has been completed and submitted to the DCEO, and I received a confirmation they did receive it, and I think the remark was, after a quick review, it looks like we supplied all the required documents, and we're waiting to hear back if we're going to be awarded the grant.
Thank you. Any timetable when that might be?
At this point in time, I don't know. It's the previous grant applications, it was a 2 to 3 week response time, and with the program closing the 15th of this month, I expect to hear by the end of the month, I'm hoping.
Any other questions, Valen, on that? Hearing none, we'll move on. Rent versus own for county agencies and county buildings. Alan?
I believe we need to turn this to Deb and let her take it away.
Yeah, this is, well, if you've read the memo, you know that there is a discrepancy about how we manage this issue. And because the mental health board lease has come to an end, it seemed appropriate to ask you, the facilities committee, as to whether or not you would want to consider a change in how we do this. Basically, the highway facility paid for its building with highway funds. The nursing home didn't pay for its facility out of its operations. The property taxpayers paid for that facility. Animal control basically pays for ongoing maintenance, but the facility was provided to it. The Regional Planning Commission, as is spelled out, offered a zero-interest loan to the county when we were purchasing this facility. We repay that loan basically with the rent that we receive from them each year. They did expand their original space requirement from 10,000 square feet to 15,950 square feet, so they're paying for the additional square footage. However, they pay all other costs. They pay for utilities not included in the rent. They pay for any remodeling that they want done, any improvements. And then there is also the fact that when you consider it, if this had been a loan made with interest, there's a lost opportunity cost to the Regional Planning Commission with regard to that. So it brings what they've actually paid in rent to an equivalent of about $11.18 per square foot. The Mental Health Board has been treated like a lessee similar to other non-county agencies. We lease space to the Attorney General's office, we lease space to the Park District, and we have leased space to other non-county functions in the past, and they have typical leases with rent charged at a per square footage rate, which includes cost of utilities, custodial, and everything is included in the rent charge. And Mental Health Board has been in that position since they moved into the building in 1996 and is currently paying the equivalent of $14.46 a square foot. So you can see there's a wide range of how we're addressing this. And so that's the purpose of this memo, to ask you if you would like to consider changing it. And talking with other counties, typically county offices and agencies that reside in county buildings aren't necessarily charged rent, but they do pay occupancy costs for residing in those buildings. So that is one way of looking at this, and that's the option one that I provided to you in saying, do we want to switch from leasing to our own county agencies to charging them for the true cost of occupancy? And I believe this can be achieved as we are developing the facilities management maintenance plan. We should know what the pro rata cost is for all of the systems for the Brookins building. And we should then be able to charge each of those, who are currently renters, their pro rata share on an annual basis, so that when it's time to replace the system, the money is in our funds to go ahead with that replacement. So there's two options here. One is to start with the mental health board by transitioning to that occupancy strategy for these agencies. The second option is to continue in a lease with the mental health board. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Well, Deb and I discussed this a little bit, and I sort of favor the rental, charging a square footage price, and then every year, 2 years, reviewing that and raising it as per cost goes up, which she explained to me they take into consideration the utilities and that. The other way, the thing I have with that is that, let's say that we plan for the heating system, and she's charging each one a certain amount of money, but then the heating system fails within a 2-year period instead of the 5 or 10 year that we were thinking about. And we've got to pay that money up front. Now, how do we go back to these folks, or they're going to be paying annually, but we need that money now? So basically it would come out of general corporate and be replenished as we take the money in. But I asked the question, let's say state's attorney's office leases space and they're on the pro rata, and then they decide, well, we no longer want to be part of this after year 2, we're moving out anyway. I don't know, I just felt like rent was fair, and we ought to be putting that into an account to accumulate and to draw on as needed. The other way, based on the history I've seen since I've been here, we estimate cost and things change, or efficiency comes into play, as we saw with the downtown jail chiller. The cost can be a lot more than what we even anticipated. So I think it needs some tweaking, and I think Deb was open to all that, but we're looking for some basically thoughts here from the group to see how they feel about it. So Rosales, you have any input? You're a building man.
I'm leaning towards option 1.
Gary?
Deb and I talked briefly about this. I suggest that possibly we might want to modify option 2 just a little bit and extend the mental health lease out to, so it can, the end of it coincides with the end of the RPC, and extend to them that rental, which would probably be a little more fair for, over the years. The same rate as RPC is paying until we can get those leases lined up. And during that interim, we could probably work towards developing the information we need to implement option 1.
Rachel?
So just so that I understand, so if there is a roof replacement or any other major system, we're going to go back to each one of these prorated departments and ask them to put in their portion?
Well, and I provided an example of that.
Right.
It's on page 20. So we know immediately what to charge the mental health board for the roof replacement.
Right.
I would submit that the mental health board should not have to go backwards because they've been paying so much in rent.
Okay.
But moving forward, that they would pay any prorated amount for any systems. The problem is, we don't know the system replacement cost for the HVAC system or have an estimate for that right now, or, for example, exterior maintenance of this facility.
Right, so my question or concern would be that on the rent, they can forecast, when they do their budget, they can forecast that, and basically it puts the whole risk on the county, because we pay for the replacement, and moving to the other system, we share the risk with them, which is in one way more fair. But at the same time, I don't know that they're going to have the money in their budgets to actually put whatever their portion of the HVAC, or I don't know, whatever else might fail. So that's more a question of, do you think they can actually de facto handle that once their budgets are set if something happens?
Well, the flaw in option one is that we don't have enough information right now.
Right.
But I didn't want to let this period pass without at least introducing the concept. If you selected option one, I would suggest to the mental health board that they should probably still try and reserve, you know, an additional $10,000 or $15,000 a year for their fair share of additional systems issues that we might be able to document to them a year from now, hopefully, for the remainder, you know, for that point moving forward. But that is a flaw in option one.
Right, and if they haven't reserved it, we still stuck with the bill.
Well, we're stuck with the bill no matter what. We've been collecting rent from them at a pretty decent rate, and none of it's gone to capital facilities replacement. So, and that's probably where all the rent should be going for that we collect for this facility.
Okay,
So, with Gary's, you know, recommendation, I guess my only request would be that, yeah, that we consider, if we're going with option two, that we adjust the rent down so that they're paying something more equitable to what the total all-in cost that RPC has been paying.
Well, would we adjust it down, or would we look at what cost is, like we discussed per square foot normally in a fair setting? You've said you've contacted other counties. I don't necessarily know if something has to go down or if RPC may have to come up. I don't know where the balance is per square foot. But I would think that would be the first step, that we need to look at those leases. And then we also, like I said, you said you review them because of the utility costs and adjust it accordingly. Am I correct? When utilities have gone up? Am I misstating something here?
Okay, RPC gets billed for their utilities costs every month.
Okay.
They pay utilities separately. It's not part of their
The
lease.
rent, okay.
It's not part of their rent. The mental health board pays rent that includes the cost of utilities and custodial services. But when you look at the total cost over the period that RPC's been here, best case is they're probably paying about $11.18 per square foot. And the mental health board started out at $11.37 per square foot in 1996. And today they're paying $14.46 per square foot. My point is, do we need to make money off of our own agencies, or should we leave that money for them to be able to invest in the reason that they exist, in other words, in the services that they provide? And I think at a rate of $14.46 per square foot, we're probably, again, we don't know our real facilities costs, so it's a little bit difficult to document with a surety. But I just think, in fairness to the mental health board, that if we're going to go with a lease, maybe a 2-year lease, taking them to the, you know, rate of, even just taking them back to the original rate that they paid of $11.37 per square foot and escalated in the second year based on the CPI. I just think that their rent has grown at a rate that is more consistent with what I would expect we would charge a private entity who's not a part of county government.
And I somewhat concur, and I may have got a little lost, but you're telling me RPC pays their utilities in addition to whatever rent they're giving us,
They pay
correct?
$5.25 a square foot.
Okay.
That's their rent.
Okay.
Anything else they do, they pay separately.
Okay, now mental health, the utilities are included with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So I guess I'm having a hard time thinking, okay, what would be if we charge them the same rent as RPC, but then what would we charge them for separately for their utilities? Would it be based on the square footage they're holding and based on the bills?
I was thinking of going with 1137 because there are other things that RPC has done which make it that they've really paid more than $5.25 a square foot, which is what their lease actually says. I mean, yeah, you could charge mental health board $5.25 per square foot, but then they didn't have the lost opportunity cost of giving $1 million loan for 20 years at no interest. And my position on that is, if RPC had made the loan to us at 4% or whatever that interest rate would have been, we would have had them pay us that much more in rent.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have actually paid it. They lost it or they would have paid it. So I don't think 525 is a fair number to use from RPC's perspective. But I would think that if we did all-inclusive, $11.37, or if you would prefer, we could also do like $8.59 and still charge mental health board for their utilities and custodial. I think if they're going to have a lease, I think they would prefer to just have a flat lease rate. And then my point is just to get the lease at a more reasonable level.
Well, since this is food for thought tonight, could you go back and crunch some of them numbers and come back to us with a better recommendation on that? Because since it's already been in effect that we're leasing, and then you want to revamp it, from what I'm hearing, to adjust it.
I can't come up with the numbers for you about what an HVAC system and exterior maintenance of Brookins is going to cost.
No, I'm talking about the lease system as now exists. You're wanting to change it for mental health, correct?
All I'm saying is if you pick option 2 and tell me to go negotiate a lease with mental health, I would ask for your authority to negotiate that lease at $11.37 a square foot instead of starting from $14.46.
Okay, and is there any way in those options that this board would have the authority to say that money will now go into repair and maintenance of the building?
Absolutely can designate
Instead of
that
for
the
other
rent should not go into general corporate, but it should go, except you might want to designate that the utilities cost portion of it stays in general corporate because that's where we pay for it, and the balance of the lease goes to the capital facilities fund.
Okay, that was my questions. Anybody else? Josh?
No, sir.
Quiz? I know Kibler does.
I love that smile on your face. I like option 2, frankly, because I think it's easier to budget, first of all, for them. It's also easier for us to assess risk as we progress. I just like the idea of having a flat rate, whatever that rate is going to be better off for, I think, all parties, in my opinion. That's just my gut feel on it. As for rate, I do concur with the chair with the fact that to come up with a good, solid market rate, we should try to assess it better. So I do like Gary's suggestion about making it wait, give them a 6-month lease or whatever that time frame is to let us assess this better. I don't care if this 6-month lease or whatever that short-term lease is $11.60 some odd cents until we can figure out what the real value of per square foot is for this building. Would that be attainable to have that information with the period of time that Gary Maxwell was thinking about?
Okay.
And perhaps it's not that you have to go find out what the cost of individual pieces of equipment would be. It may be more, what did the county spend on this building over the past 10 years and project from there, as opposed to trying to figure out what's needed within the next couple of years.
A little over a year ago, Ellen and I came to the county board and requested a study be done to assess the needs of this building, and that requires hiring an outside architectural engineering consultant, and the county board determined not to do that. Ellen and I do not have the capability of providing you with those numbers. It is going to take a contract at some point to have a full assessment of this building done to determine what the true overall costs are for maintenance of this facility. We can't project what it's going to cost to replace the HVAC system in this very complicated building where everything is probably going to have to be redone to do an appropriate, green energy and, taking into consideration today's technology as opposed to this facility built in some California style in the 1960s. We don't have that information. So, I understand staying with a lease at this point in time. When we have that information, I think it's more equitable for the county board to use option 1. When you know what you can say, what should be reserved for your square footage in this building because the county's reserving for all the rest of the square footage to be able to take care of this building appropriately, that you pay that every year as the county would be doing from its general fund. And secondly, that you be billed for custodial and utilities services rather than building it into rent. I think that it's probably preliminary to do that before we have that information. And I don't think we'll have that information in 6 months, given everything else that's on the plate of this county board right now. So I would suggest that if you would authorize, renewing a lease with the Mental Health Board to discount their rate back to the 1996 rate that they paid for the first year and adjust it by next year's CPI for the second year, that basically gets us into moving towards 2016 when the RPC lease will end and the county board at that time can decide, do we have enough information or what are we going to do with leases? Because I don't expect the county board, if you stay with the lease arrangement with RPC, that you're going to stay with $5.25 a square foot. But, until we know all the true building costs, it's very difficult to assess that.
Deb, could you come up with that recommendation and we could just move this to the full board?
Well, what I'd like to do is if you would approve negotiating the lease with the Mental Health Board at, the $11.37 rate, we could bring the lease, for a 2-year period at least, that we could bring that lease to you at the board meeting this month. Unless you'd rather have it come back to you in June.
Do we need someone want to make a motion? We have a motion on the floor and a second. Any discussion on the motion? From board members?
So just to clarify, the motion is to have a 2-year lease agreement for $11.67.
37.
Okay, so not the interim, but the full lease, okay.
Josh?
I support this idea. My only concern would be adding an additional administrative requirement to RPC and the Mental Health Board that then they cannot plan their rent and their costs out easily by this. I mean, we are more equipped to be able to deal with dynamic situations than they are. So I would rather have the onus of emergency budgeting be on us as a board rather than on the Mental Health Board.
So we have a motion and a second. Patsy?
Well, a couple of things that I wonder as you all vote on this to be thinking about. I think maybe option 1 is a bit on the condo format where a special assessment could come.
Yeah. Yes.
That's what I think
That's
you're
right.
thinking about.
Good
But
point.
in the lease then, to ameliorate some of these concerns about onus on the different agencies, can the lease be structured so that there is in the lease that that each agency be considering 10% set aside, for the potential special assessments or some such wording like that, since we don't have any facts and figures as to the exact amount, but the flag has been run up the pole, letting people know that sometime down the line, this is a potential that might be coming up to handle big things like HVAC and some things like that. That's one. And then number 2 is, how do we have any guarantees that in 2 years, the same group of people are going to be in this building? I mean, I can see shifting going on, and actually, I would love to see us all down in that bank building right across from the courthouse in the hub of the population. And so as we're thinking about this, it's very important to be thinking about it, but I also think we need to run parallel to this conversation, some scenarios of how things might play out. If I can see RPC picking up and just saying, we'll go somewhere else, and that's a big chunk of the occupancy here and some things like that. So I toss that out for folks to be considering as you do your voting.
And we did discuss that, Patsy. Quisenberry?
Yeah, I can support this. My only hesitation is the dollar amount, which I'd prefer to have it be based on what's a competitive rate in the community rather than what was done in 1996 or where the RPC is now based on their loan to the county, things like that. I don't know if we can get to a good market rate that is also fair, so I'm probably going to let it lie.
One quick comment, if I may. I had told Deb that I have a gentleman that works for the state, and he's in the leasing of buildings, and he said a good figure to use nowadays when they start a lease is around $15 a square foot. Rosales?
So if we vote for this option, option 2, to go ahead and reassign this lease at 12 or 11:30, there would not be an opportunity to establish a fund to fund any repairs, major repairs, that would occur in this building. Is that correct?
No, because you could designate that the rent payment less the cost of utilities and custodial services be placed in the capital facilities fund if you're going with a lease approach versus an owner approach.
So if we go with a lease approach, could we stipulate that it would go?
Well,
those
that's
funds?
up to you. That doesn't have to be in the lease. What you do with the money after they pay the lease is up to you. We don't need to put that in the lease.
And that would not be tied to this motion now? Could we tie it into this motion now and
I-
make a recommendation?
You can tie that anytime you want to. I mean, you can, that's not really what is this agenda item, so perhaps we need to have facilities consider that as an agenda item, whether or not all lease payments less cost of utilities and custodial should go into facilities maintenance instead of staying in the general corporate fund, which is what has historically happened. That's sort of another topic of discussion, and I would suggest maybe you want that on your agenda in the near future to recommend to finance.
Right, because I think when we established the $800,000 fund for the courthouse, we were looking at other possibilities of establishing other funds for other buildings that we have, so we could have a contingency fund when these major repairs occur. And the courthouse is the only building that we have a contingency fund for any major repairs, and that's why we're drawing from that fund now to repair the masonry.
Right.
Whereas here, we don't have anything, right?
That's right.
There's
And we
nothing
have that-
stipulated, and
we ha-
approving option 2 would not provide us with anything. And we're bringing down the lease, so we'll be receiving less money, and there's no contingency plan to reserve anything if the furnace goes out or if the HVAC goes out. So I cannot support this option at this time. I would have to support option 1, but I believe that that's not the motion on the table, so.
You're absolutely right, and that was some good discussion in there, because normally, as a landlord, you take care of all the other bills and you charge a rent and build up your reserve, but that's a good thing. But there is a motion on the floor. Quisenberry? I thought you had something. I'm done. You gave up. Josh?
I just want to say that I would agree with you, Mr. Rosales, but I would like to see, I think that having it as a separate agenda item to establish this fund and put that money there would be wise, but I would completely agree with you that we need to make sure that a lot of this money starts going towards that capital fund.
And that's what I said.
Yes.
Any other discussion? One, did I hear something? Kibble.
Yes, Part A of 17, no, it's a quick question. Since we're giving authority for $11 and some odd cents, and assuming we all approve yes, does it get thrown on the consent agenda, or is this because it's a contract, gets voted on full
No,
board?
because you don't have the lease tonight. So
Okay.
the lease will be on the regular county board agenda.
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes. Okay, moving on. We've done the next one because we moved it up. Other business. Anybody have any other business? Okay, chair's report. I thank everybody for coming as I normally do. I do appreciate all the input, and we're having some good discussion. Thank you, Patsy. The nursing home is a place, we have talked before about going off-site and doing a meeting somewhere else. The weather's warmed up. We're going to be pushing June, July. We normally don't have any meetings. I would like to recommend that our next meeting, and you won't have video cameras there, but it will be recorded, that we direct Mr. Reinhardt or Deb to set up a meeting place for us at the nursing home, and before the meeting, we would allocate 20, 30 minutes to walk around, 20 minutes maybe to walk around, just get an overview of something that we own and take care of. And then we'd sit in a room and have our meeting.
The new nursing home?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Is there an old one still?
Well, it's Ilea's, but yeah, I just
Oh,
want to make sure.
well, I don't think they'd want us in there. So does the committee, since I'm throwing this out, would the committee like that, or would they rather not?
I think it's a grand idea, Mr. Chairman.
We would meet at the new nursing home the purpose is to sort of look around at the building that we're overseeing, walk through it together as a group, see if things are the way we expect them to be, and then sit there and hold a meeting there, and also to show people that we're doing due diligence by getting out instead of sitting in a room and just talking about things.
I have no problem with that, but.
Thank you.
However,
I knew there was a however.
I thought that the nursing home facilities issues are resolved by nursing home facility budget, or whatever. It's there, right? It's not in our budget. So, I mean, I don't mind having all meetings there, but this is not really something in the purview of the facilities committee, right? We're not taking care of their building or anything
Well,
like
we
that.
do, at times, we've loaned them money from general corporate.
We don't anymore.
Well, but we can't say never. Never say never, Rachel.
I just did.
So I think that we all need to go in there, and it'd be enlightening. It's been a while since I've been in there, other than to visit folks like Mr. Maxwell and Patsy, but I would like to go again. So if the group's in favor of that, I would like to do so and have the agenda set up for there.
Just clarification, so you want a tour at 5:30 and the meeting at 6?
Can't we do the tour starting at 6?
And the meeting at
and
6:30?
allow 30 minutes, give or take. That way we can have a restroom break and then start the meeting.
So the meeting will be noticed for 6:30 and the tour will be noticed for 6?
6. Fair enough?
It's doable.
That's what we'll do then, so we'll set that up and we'll have Alan, we'll all just drive there. We're not gonna have Alan come with a big bus and haul us. That's my chair's report, and I wanna thank Josh for bringing those folks in to talk. That was enlightening. And then I think Mr. Quisenberry has something.
I'd like to move adjournment.
There you go. Hearing no objections, we're adjourned.